The docking clamp engaged with a deep, familiar clunk, and I finally let myself breathe. 12 days hauling compressed deuterium across the Kessler relay had left me tired in a way that went past the body and settled somewhere deeper. 12 days of recycled air that tasted faintly of metal, of protein packs that all had the same sad flavor, regardless of what the packaging promised, of a navigation system that beeped at me every 4 hours whether I needed it to or not. But now the broken meridian was down on something solid. Gravity was behaving like gravity, and Kareth Dock was outside that ramp. I pulled on my jacket, grabbed the transit manifest from the console, and hit the release. The ramp came down with a slow hydraulic hiss. Warm dock air rolled up to meet me, that particular blend of coolant and machine oil, and the faint biological signature of a station that housed several dozen species under one pressurized roof. I stood at the top of the ramp for just a moment, and took it in the way a person takes in sunshine after a long time indoors. Then I walked down and stepped onto the dock floor. The noise stopped. Not the gradual kind of quiet that happens when a crowd notices something. The instant kind. A circle of silence that erupted from the point where my boots met the floor and spread outward across the concourse, like a shockwave moving through still water. By the time I had taken 3 steps from the ramp, I could hear my own breathing. I looked down at my boots. Nothing wrong with my boots. I touched my face. Nothing there either. I looked up. Roughly 40 beings across at least a dozen species were looking at me. Some had simply frozen mid-motion, suspended in whatever they had been doing before I arrived. A gray-plated Threll dock worker who came up to about my chest had backed into a cargo pallet without appearing to notice. A group of Kareth merchants at a transaction counter had stopped completely, the vendor still holding out an exchange token in open air, the recipient nowhere nearby. 2 Yorn technicians who had been walking directly toward me had rerouted, not in a hurried way, but in the automatic, unthinking way of water flowing around a stone. Nobody said anything. I turned to find my liaison. The station manifest had been clear. A Velhari attaché named Scylla Veith would meet me dockside. Scholar cast, it said. First galactic posting. I had pictured someone with a clipboard and a practiced welcome speech. I found her 6 meters away, standing beside the base of my landing strut. She was staring at me the way you stare at something that does not match any category you have prepared for it. 4 slender limbs, pale blue-gray skin, large amber eyes that were currently as wide as I suspected they were capable of going. She reached somewhere around my shoulder in height. She was holding a data slate with both hands, and both hands had completely stopped moving. Her mouth was open. I walked over slowly. I smiled, and I made a point of making it a friendly smile, because I have been told on more than one occasion that my default expression is not particularly welcoming. Scylla Veith, I said. Captain Marcus Aurel, Broken Meridian. I think you are here for me. She blinked, once, then again. Her secondary jaw shifted slightly, which I had read somewhere was a Velhari equivalent of swallowing. Then, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, the voice of someone saying something out loud without quite meaning to, she said, "It is much bigger than I expected." I decided the polite thing was to let that pass without comment. Standard human build, actually, I said. 6'3", 110 kilos. The data files are fairly accurate. She blinked again and appeared to gather herself from some distance. She straightened up, adjusted her grip on the slate, and lifted her chin to approximately the level of my collarbone, which seemed to be the highest angle she could hold comfortably while still making eye contact. Captain Aurel. Her standard was precise and clear, with the slight over-sharpness of someone who had learned the language from recordings rather than conversation. Welcome to Kareth Dock. I am Scylla Veith, Junior Diplomatic Attaché, Velhari Scholastic Exchange. I have been assigned as your liaison for the duration of your resupply layover. I am pleased to welcome you. She had clearly rehearsed that. I could tell because she delivered it without breathing. Glad to meet you, I said, and meant it genuinely. After 12 days alone, I would have been glad to meet a wall. Lead the way, she led the way, I followed. The corridor ahead of us cleared. That is the only way to describe what happened. Beings who had been moving toward us, some of considerable size, some clearly with somewhere to be, simply shifted to the edges without being asked. There was no announcement, no authority, no signal I was aware of giving. I was walking at a perfectly ordinary pace with my hands in my jacket pockets, because the corridor was slightly cold. and yet the path opened in front of us, as steadily and reliably as if someone had arranged it in advance. Silavith was writing on her data slate while she walked, using a small stylus, covering the screen quickly. "Making notes?" I asked. She startled, which told me she had half forgotten I was walking directly beside her. "Observational documentation," she said, "for the exchange record." "About me?" A brief pause. "About the encounter." Broadly. I let it go. The first doorframe I encountered was at the junction between two dock sections. The station had been built for species that averaged considerably shorter than I do. The frame clearance was perhaps 180 centimeters, and I am not 180 centimeters. I ducked, out of habit, without breaking stride. Silavith had walked straight through without a thought, turned around, and found me straightening up on the other side. She wrote something. "Does that happen often?" she asked. "Every station," I said. "You learn to check the ceiling before you walk into a room." She wrote something else. I noticed she wrote a great deal more than the situation seemed to warrant. We passed through a second corridor, narrower than the first, and I watched two beings on the other side see me through the far end, stop, and quietly choose a different route. I had stopped noticing that kind of thing years ago. Silavith had not stopped noticing it. She had, in fact, noticed it 3 times before I had noticed her noticing it once. She was thorough. I could respect that. The station canteen was 3 levels below the main docking ring, a wide, low space with mismatched furniture, sized for half a dozen different species, and lighting adjusted to a neutral tone that served none of them particularly well. About 30 beings were spread across the tables when we arrived. The food available was the kind of universal mediocrity that only a genuinely neutral station could achieve. I respected it for that. I got a protein meal that was approximately what I would have chosen, and a cup of something the dispenser labeled coffee, which I accepted on faith. I sat down across from Silavith, who had a small flask of something Velhari that produced a thin curl of green-tinted steam. The 2 beings at the nearest adjacent table gathered their things and relocated within about a minute of my sitting down. I did not mention this. We made reasonable conversation. She asked about the cargo run. I asked about the resupply timeline and whether the dock administrator had received my maintenance request. She explained the transit manifest process. It was easy and calm, and I found myself genuinely enjoying it. She was precise and curious, and had a way of asking follow-up questions that told me she had been listening carefully to the answer before. Then the noise started from the concourse outside. It came in low at first, the friction of raised voices, and then rose quickly to something harder, deep, carrying tones from at least 2 different species, well past the range of words intended to solve anything. A sharp crack of something metal striking a wall, then something considerably larger. Every being in the canteen went still. I set my cup down and stood up. It was not a decision I was aware of making. It was the older kind of response, the kind that does not go through the part of the brain that weighs options. I was on my feet and moving toward the entrance before I had formed a complete thought about it. In the main concourse, 2 groups had drawn up against each other with the specific, weighted posture of beings who have already decided words are not going to settle things. On one side stood 3 Grathvel, a cargo species built wide and low, each one a wall of dense muscle and gray plating, currently arranged in the broad-legged stance that meant someone was approximately 10 seconds from throwing something heavy. Across from them, a group of Yorn traders, smaller and more numerous, compensating for the size difference with volume and forward pressure. Between them, a Kareth station security officer, barely reaching my shoulder, was talking fast and not being heard by anyone. I walked out of the canteen and into the concourse, and I put myself in the space between the security officer and the Grathvel group. I did not run, I did not shout, I did not reach for anything. I walked at the same pace I had walked through every corridor on this station, and I stopped at the point where stopping made sense, and I looked at the lead Grathvel. He was large in the way that things built entirely for function are large. Nothing extra, nothing decorative, every part of him serving a purpose. His eyes were the deep amber copper of his species, and they were carrying the particular light that I had learned, over several years in difficult places, to recognize immediately. The light of someone who is committed to what comes next. His eyes met mine. I held the look. Not aggressively, not with anything added to it, just steadily, the way you hold something that needs to be held. He blinked. I waited. He looked away. It cost him something. I could see that, and he covered it by shifting his weight and glancing at his companions as if that had been the plan, but he stepped back half a pace. The posture changed, the weight came down, and behind him, the other two adjusted to match him the way a group always adjusts to match its front. The Yorn traders muttered and shuffled but stepped back as well. The security officer said something quietly into their communicator, in the voice of someone who has been unexpectedly pulled from deep water and is still deciding how to feel about being on dry land. The concourse started breathing again. I went back inside, walked to the table, and sat down. Scylla Veith was looking at me. She had, I suspected, not looked away from the entrance the entire time. "You did not have a weapon," she said. "Did not need one. You are not station security. Retired military. 8 years. She looked at her slate. She looked at me. She set the stylus down, which was the first time since we had met that she had stopped writing. "Captain Orell," she said, "I want to be honest with you, because I believe honesty serves better than comfortable inaccuracy in diplomatic contexts." She folded her hands on the table. They were small and very still. "I have studied humanity with considerable depth. My doctoral exchange thesis examined human physiological and psychological characteristics in comparative galactic context. I have reviewed every first contact observational report filed by every species that has encountered humans to date. I have studied your anatomy, your history, your social structures, your conflict patterns." She paused. "I was entirely unprepared for you," she said. I looked at her for a moment. "The measurements are right, though. You said so yourself." "The measurements are accurate," she agreed. "That is precisely the problem. Accurate numbers do not produce accurate expectations. A data file can tell me you are 1.9 meters tall and 110 kilograms. It cannot tell me what 1.9 meters looks like when it walks through a door. It cannot tell me what the room does in response." She tilted her head slightly. The amber eyes were very focused. "The word I keep returning to is gestalt, the whole impression, the sum that is larger than its parts. No report I read had captured that. What will you write in yours?" I asked. "A great deal," she said. "Considerably more than I planned." I picked up the coffee. It was cold by now, and had not improved with cooling. I slid it across the table toward her. "Try this," I said. "Tell me what you think." She looked at the cup. She looked at me. She picked it up with both hands, carefully, the way you handle something you have been warned about, and took the smallest sip I had ever witnessed a living being take. Her face moved through several expressions quickly. "This," she said, setting it down with great precision, "is genuinely unpleasant." "Yes," I said. "You are aware of this." "I am. And you drink it anyway. Every single day." She looked at the cup for a long time. Then she picked up her stylus and wrote something on her slate. She wrote for longer than anything else had warranted during our entire afternoon together. I did not ask what it said. It seemed like the right thing to let her keep. But I know now, because I was accidentally included on the formal filing that went to the Velhari Scholastic Exchange 3 weeks later, and because I am the kind of person who reads things they are accidentally sent. She had written many careful and detailed pages, measurements, observations, behavioral notes, comparative analysis, all of it thorough, all of it precise, all of it, by her own admission in the summary section, still insufficient. The final lines read, "Recommend immediate and complete revision of all first contact human protocols. Current materials fail to convey physical presence, psychological weight, or the social effect of proximity. Revisions should prioritize experiential preparation over statistical data. Additional note, humans consume a bitter, low-quality beverage called coffee, voluntarily and with apparent enthusiasm. Reason remains unclear. Further study required. They will offer it to you. Accept it. It matters to them more than the taste."